this is Sohini Pyne. I am an architect and I have done my masters in architectural conservation from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Before doing my masters, I was working with architect Vikas Dilavadi in Bombay on heritage, graded heritage structures. After my masters, I was working in Kolkata for a couple of months with architect Anjan Mitro, and now I'm working with Dr. Shikha Jain at Drona. So today we'll talk about the Chinatown, Tireta Bazaar Old Chinatown, and its nomination in the World Monuments Fund, World Monuments Watch of 2022. So just to give a brief background of how this started, this was a part of my thesis area. I had always been very interested in understanding how demographic changes in migrant communities settling from elsewhere and their subsequent outmigration, and what effect that has on the built heritage today. So that is how my thesis topic started. So as we know, Calcutta was a very cosmopolitan city between the 18th and the 20th centuries because of the fact that it was the capital of the first the East India Company and then the Crown, and also because it was a very important trading center, commercial center. So all the trading communities from different parts of the world came and settled in Calcutta, and especially in the dense commercial nucleus of the city, which is Boro Bazar, Bow Bazar and Tireta Bazar. However, after 200 years, due to various reasons, there were reasons of political issues, there was lack of job security. A large section of these communities outmigrated, which left a void in these spaces. But however, when they were here for 200 years, they built a vast stock of cultural heritage resources, built heritage, architectural heritage. So my thesis started from the point that who now takes responsibility for these structures, and what happens to the built heritage of a community that is constantly dwindling, and how can we as heritage professionals and heritage enthusiasts empower these communities, some of whom are marginalized, like the Indian Chinese community in Calcutta, and how do we ensure that these heritage assets, that the heritage that they had built over the past 200 years, how do these remain as assets to these communities instead of becoming liabilities. So my thesis started from this point, and eventually after my thesis ended in January 2020, World Monuments Fund also advertised for the nomination of sites in the World Monuments Watch 2022. So this is when I applied for the nomination of Tireta Bazaar Old Chinatown as part of the 2022 World Monuments Watch. So I'm sure everybody here knows about the history of the Chinese in Calcutta, but I'll still give a brief introduction regarding that. So the first Chinese settler that is documented to have come and settled in this area is Yong Achu or Tong Achu, as mentioned in different sources. And he was the first Chinese settler in India. He came in around 1780, and he set up a factory of sugar plantations and of sugar mill in Achipur. He was granted land by the government to set up a plantation at Achipur, and this was about 650 bighas of land, and he brought about 110 men from China to help start this sugar plantation. However, this was very short-lived because in 1782 he passes away, and the Achipur is taken back by the government. 65 years after his death, this is as recorded by Jawahar Sirkar, 65 years after Yong Achu's death, there were uh, a group of Chinese shoemakers who were noticed on Benting Street, which was earlier Kashai Tola Road. And Colesworthy Grant reports that all carpenters attached to our ships in the country service are Chinese. So he talks about how all the shipbuilders during that period in Calcutta were Chinese. And by the mid 19th century, there was quite a large community of Chinese which starts to settle in this area. So you have Benting Street, you have parts of Chitpur Road, and mainly in Tireta Bazaar, which is Fears Lane, Blackburn Lane, Damson Lane, and Chatawala Gully. So these were the areas that they largely settled in. And there were three waves. Firstly was when Yong Achu brought his 110 men from China to India. Secondly was during the Kuomintang rule. And thirdly was after the Second World War, when there was a large wave of Chinese migrants who came and settled in Kolkata. So if we see the census, so in 1837 there were 362 Chinese in Calcutta. In 1911 there were 2,411 Chinese. In 1951 there were 3,710, and in 1961 there was 8,918. So between the 19th and the 20th century, there was a large settlement of Chinese in Kolkata. Of course, as we all know, that there were three communities which largely came and settled here. One is the Cantonese community and the Hupe community, who settled in the Tireta Bazaar area, and the third is the Hakka community, who are largely located in the second Chinatown of Kolkata, which is Tangra, which developed in the 1920s. And so the Cantonese were carpenters and shipbuilders, the Hupes were dentists, and the Hakkas were chiefly involved in leather and tanneries. So while they were settling in this area, the Chinese built a very distinctive Chinatown here, which is unlike the other communities that we see. Like, for example, the Jews and the Armenians and the Parsis, they had large houses of worship like the synagogues and the Atash Adarans or the fire temples, but the neighborhood was never distinctively Parsi or distinctively Jewish or distinctively Armenian. Of course, we have names of streets which mention these communities, but what is different with the Chinese is that their neighborhood became very distinctively Chinese. And Jawahar Sirkar gives us a description of this. He says that they created little Chinatowns replete with traditional Chinese temples, dragon architecture, gaily painted signboards and festoons in their bold and picturesque languages, with the rustle of red silks and the aroma of Chinese food. So, and till 1962, when things started to change, these were very distinctive. This was a very distinct Chinatown. So during this time, the Chinese built 6 temples here. So when the Chinese came from the mainland, they came from 6 different clans. So you won't see the Chinese temples following a particular layout. They don't have a particular spatial typology, or all of them don't look the same. This is because they came from different parts of China, and they brought in from their village or from their settlement the kind of architecture that they had. So there's nothing, there's similarities, but there are also in terms of spatial typology, it is very diverse. And also the deities that are worshipped over here, they all differ in the different temples. So I'll just talk about the architecture of these. So we have 6 temples over here. So we have the Namsoon temple, which is the earliest temple, built in 1820. Then the Chungi Dong, which was built in 1859. Then Siep temple, which was built in 1905. Se Vui temple, which is 1908. Ji Hing, which was built in Tiretta Bazaar in 1920, but it might have been located near Bo Bazaar before that, Bara Bazaar before that. And then the last temple that was built was Tungon in 1924. Now, all of these, apart from being distinctive in their architecture, they also borrowed elements from local Bengali architectural styles, and also from the European architecture that was prevalent and in trend during that time. So you see the newer temples like say Jihing or Tungon, which have borrowed various classical features, like you have the you have circular columns with flutings, and the capitals with a decorative pediment. So you'll see these architectural elements are being borrowed from the European classical styles. So it's a very interesting and syncretic mix of architecture that we see in this area. Also, the neighborhoods were of a very human scale. It wasn't too large. The temples are also not too large. It's not. It's of a human scale, unlike the synagogues or the Armenian churches, which are of a much larger proportion. This could also be because of the fact that the Chinese were involved in trading activities, which were like much smaller trading activities, like they were shoemakers, or they were carpenters, while the Armenians and the Jews were dealing with larger mills, real estate, and tobacco and jute. So there was that difference, which is why there's a difference in the scale of these different communities that settled over here. And from the outside, when you look at the temple facades, all the temples have a distinctive Chinese calligraphy on the three sides of the doorway, and you'll also see these Chinese lanterns hanging from the first floor. And once you go inside, they are extremely richly decorated. So right in front of the shrine, in front of for all the temples, there is a woodwork. So there's this woodwork in front of the shrine, and in two temples there is also a large ship which is hanging from the ceiling, and all of this is in wood. And they have these birds and mythical figures and fruits and vegetation which is carved. It's a carved woodwork piece, and the interiors are brightly painted in vermilion or yellow or green, which are the colors which are considered to be auspicious in the Chinese mainland. So yes, this was largely about the architecture of these areas. Oh, one more thing is that each of these temples, because they came from a particular clan, they also serve as social gathering spaces. So all the temples are on either the first or the ground floor, and the other floor is always a club. So for example, the Sivui temple is the Sivui temple and Voiling club. So each of the temples also have a club associated with it, which is the social gathering space for that clan. So even if you go today to Jihing temple, you will see the elders of that temple playing mahjong. It's like chess, but so it's a game they indulge in every Sundays or whenever they have free time. So if you go today, you'll still see people using that space not just as a religious center but also as a social gathering space. So in 1962, so what is the heritage that we have? Like, we have the 6 Chinese temples, we have residences, and we have a lot of commercial establishments. And so this was a fairly established Chinatown. Now in 1962, with the Indo-Chinese War, things changed drastically. There was a lot of political insecurity. There was a detention camp which was made in Deoli, and people from the Indian Chinese were shifted to those imprisonment camps, and they were framed, their passports were seized, their trade licenses were cancelled, their properties were confiscated, and because of this tension, there was a large section of the Chinese started out migrating. Now, when a community outmigrates in such a rapid manner from a neighborhood, there's obviously a void in that urban space. Now, this void being gets started, like it's getting filled up by communities of lower income groups, and so we see a lot of encroachment. We see a lot of habitation where there's cramped dwelling. So there's slowly a sort of urban dereliction starts. Also, in after this, the KIT, Kolkata Improvement Trust, at that time CIT, they start building in this area, and they completely change the land use of this area from a predominantly low-rise mixed-use settlement to a to offices and to completely commercial spaces. So right now, in front of enveloping, like almost surrounding the Siep temple and the Tungon temple, you see two extremely high-rise multi-story apartments, which offices, which is the KIT building and the BSNL building. This has completely dwarfed the area, the historic neighborhood, and it's almost not visible anymore. So you sort of miss out on, if you're passing through the street, you miss out on these small temples in front of these enormous multi-storied buildings. There's also other problems in the side. There's a complete lack of garbage disposal system. All the garbage is disposed right in front of the temples. There's a compactor which is present right in front of Tungon. In front of Siep temple, there is a lot of just wood piled on top of these just in front of the structures. There is no waste disposal system. There are no waste bins. The area has been completely encroached by parking, and for the KIT building and for the BSNL building, and there is also encroachment by squatters, and this has led to a complete urban dereliction in the area. So this is when I thought that this area needs to be brought into global limelight, so that there can be urgent action taken for this area and for this community. So this is where I started nominating it for the World Monuments Watch, and so we have quite a few plans for these areas. There are different things that we would like to do. Firstly, this is again not coming from World Monuments Watch. This is coming from me as an individual who has studied the site. Firstly, would be to completely to have better waste disposal system in this area, to ensure that you do not disrespect the religious heritage, the cultural heritage of an already marginalized, dwindling minority community by placing waste in front of them, to ensure that they can sustain themselves through different ways. One would be tourism. So World Monuments Watch this year, there were four criterias, out of which two were underrepresented heritage and imbalanced tourism. So these were 2 points which completely fit with this area, because this has a huge tourism potential. The community can make themselves self-sufficient if we completely tap into the tourism potential of this site. As heritage professionals and enthusiasts, we need to empower these communities to be able to make these decisions by themselves, and also to provide them with support, if not economically, but like technical support, support through advocacy, and yes. So, and also the breakfast market, which is there, which has been there for quite a few years now. It has, over the years, it has deteriorated in terms of quality, authenticity, and again extremely poor waste disposal, waste management system. So this could also be a very important factor which could be used to increase tourism in this area. And so these were largely the goals I had in mind when I nominated this site for World Monuments Watch, and we are very hopeful. And like just last week, I met all the most of the community members, and they are also very hopeful that this time. So this project had also had been taken up, I think, in the early part of the decade, and there was an immense amount of work done by Intac and by the Cha project, which is it was a coalition with the Singapore company and Intac, and there was a lot of groundwork, a lot of research, a lot of documentation that has been done on the site, but for some reason it did not take off, and the community was also very involved at that time, and since it did not take off, they have become a little skeptical of everything. So we are hopeful that with this global recognition and global advocacy coming from a global agency, that something can be some positive change can be brought about to this neighborhood and this community who really are in urgent need of conservation and urban regeneration. Okay, that's it from my end, and if there are any questions, I could answer them. If there's an option to share photographs, I would like to share some pictures, but I don't know if that is possible. There's one question which says, what kind of idols do they have in these temples? So each temple has about 2 or 3 distinctive idols, and some of them, of course, they have Chinese names, but some of them are the god of war or the god of wealth, because this is essentially a trading community. So these are the kind of idols that they have in these temples, and the Indian Chinese that have settled in this area are either Confucians or Buddhists, and then there are also some Christians. So these are the religious background of the process. So the process was in January, I think 2020 or 2021. I think in January 2021 they called out for applications for nominating the site. For me, the study was already done because I had worked on it for my thesis for about a year and a half actually, and so all the historical background, the establishing of the significance. So when we say that we need to conserve or we need to conserve a cultural heritage resource, we look at the significance in various how significant are they and why should we conserve it, and who does it hold importance for, who is it significant for. So this study was also done with my thesis. So I looked at the historical significance of the area, because it's settled in the Chinese settled in the historic nucleus, the commercial nucleus of the city. So it was extremely historically significant with structures dating back from the 1820s, which is the earliest Chinese temple. And then we looked at the associational significance. the community, not just the community that is living in India today, in Calcutta today, but also the diaspora communities who have out migrated from India to Canada, to Australia, to the States. Even they have a very strong associational connect with Chinatown, with Calcutta, with Tiretta Bazaar, Chinatown. They still come back during their New Year's festival, which is sometime in like end of January or beginning of February. They come back for All Souls Day, which is held in Achipur. So there's a great associational connect with the Indian Chinese community as well as their diaspora. Then the architectural significance was also extremely large, because we are looking at the syncretic mix of the Chinese, the Indian, the native Bengali, and also the colonial culture. So the architecture has it's the syncretic mix of the three. And of course, there's cultural significance. There's a lot of intangible heritage associated with this area. So this was the statement of significance. What kind of documentation did I do to present this case before the organization? Documentation, a large amount of documentation was already done by INTAC and the CHA project. So other than the physical documentation of the buildings, which was largely done, I looked at documentation in terms of how are the contemporary communities of this area, like for example the Chinese have moved out, right? So the people who are in this area right now, how do they view the heritage? For example, the people who come to office, to this KIT building, to BSNL building, how do they view the heritage of the Chinese? Do they see it as part of their own, or do they see this heritage as something that they don't need to be involved with? What is the kind of connect that they have? And of course, one of the solutions to this problem was to ensure that the contemporary communities, the communities of today, can also relate to this heritage, can also understand the significance of this heritage, and also think of it as their own. Because right now they have very little relevance. These structures have very little relevance to them. So this would be a very important part of the process, to not just involve the Chinese community that is living in Tiretta Bazaar, but also the other communities that have now taken that, taken up that void. So this was one documentation that I had done through interviews and through group discussions. Can only architects apply? No, this can be the World Monuments Fund. Anybody can apply to this. It's a 2-year cycle. So it's happened in 2022. So the next watch will be in 2024. For 2024, the applications will start in 2023, and it can be people who are. It can be applied by individuals. It can be applied by organizations, NGOs, or the government. So there is. It's not just only architects who can apply. What about the buildings in respect of restoration and other preservation measures? Yes, so World Monuments Fund will be looking at sponsoring projects, or getting sponsors to restore the buildings. And so the restoration of these temples will take place. Okay, are there any other questions? So if you would like to know a little bit more about the process, so World Monuments Fund has a template of a few questions which need to be answered uh, when you're doing the application. So this is about 10 or 15 questions which require you to give them a description of the history of the site. It requires you to give a short description of the physical features of the site and the site's physical context. For example, what is the setting, what is the architectural style, how was it constructed, what is the construction techniques and materials. So there's a description of the physical features of the site. Then you have to explain the cultural significance of the site, as I was saying. So what is important in the site? What is significant? Is it the only the aesthetic qualities? Is there some kind of intangible association with it? Does it have some religious sentiment? What is the cultural significance of this area? Next is they ask you to describe the stakeholders who are associated with the site, and and to explain their interest in the site. After this, we come to the question of what are the major challenges which the site is facing. Uh, so when World Monuments Watch nominates any site, they look at three important things. One is how significant is the site. Number two is what is the urgency of how urgent is it to provide help, to provide some funding or help in other means to this site. And number three is how much can World Monuments Fund help? Like, what is the feasibility of the project? So these were the three factors that they look into while finally nominating a site. So this year about 225 nominations were sent in, of which 25 sites were finally nominated. Is it only the precinct or isolated building? It's the entire precinct. We're looking at Old Chinatown as an entire precinct with 6 temples which will be highlighted. So there are 6 temples and along with the commercial establishments, but it's largely the precinct, the neighborhood, with focus on the 6 temples. Who will take the responsibility of restoration? There's going to be a process which World Monuments Fund will be coming up with, and the restoration will be taken up by World Monuments Fund, but there will also be other responsibilities of various other agencies. Yes, there is numerous such places in and around Calcutta, but why I selected this neighborhood specifically was because of the 2 factors of underrepresented heritage and imbalanced tourism, which completely fit this site to the T. Is West Bengal Heritage Commission involved? No, the West Bengal Heritage Commission is not yet involved in any way. But since the process has just started, World Monuments Fund may partner up with other agencies. Is the UNESCO also involved? No, this has got nothing to do with the UNESCO. The World Monuments Fund is an organization based in New York, and they are a separate agency. Thank you for having me here. And yes, it was great. Uh, Thank you for asking these questions. Uh, so I think tell us about future projects. Right now, this is I mean this is going to take up a lot of require a lot of effort, and yes. So I'm currently working with another organization, which is Drona, and I would love to nominate other sites for other, for support from other agencies also. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. And if there are any other questions, or if anybody would like to help in any manner, or provide technical assistance or any kind of support for this project, then please do reach out to me, and I would put you in touch with World Monuments Fund if possible. So, yes, thank you, and thank you, ma'am, for inviting me. Yes, it would be very. It would be great to have a heritage walk soon. And even I was discussing with the community members. They would like to be present during the heritage walk to give further insights, and they could give more stories, more tidbits about their community, and they were also very interested to be involved in these heritage walks. Tell us about a date. Any day, I think, if I speak to the members of the Indian Chinese community, um, and we can settle on a date where they are also present, and a proper heritage walk can be arranged. So date is not an issue. I think whenever is suitable, preferably on a Saturday or Sunday, because that's when they are more free. Okay, thank you for having me here, and good night.